into the stadium, Katrina Webb, dual gold medalist Atlanta.
Be guided, be lifted, inspired by the fire within.
As you can imagine, that was a moment in my life that I'll never forget. To have the opportunity to bring the torch into the stadium for the opening ceremony of the Sydney 2000 Paralympic Games. Now, there was 110,000 people in that stadium, and while I was underneath the stadium preparing to come through the fireworks into the stadium, someone had to tell me that there was going to be 2.2 billion television viewers around the world. Not the greatest time to find out this news, but remember back to 2000, we didn't have iPhones. We received faxes in the village, so to know that there was going to be a TV audience of 2.2 billion viewers was extraordinary. Now, the next photo I'm going to bring up is also a moment in my life that was actually never in my goals or my plans. To have the incredible honour of speaking at the United Nations headquarters in New York in the year of 2006. Why was I there? I was chosen as one of 4 athletes from around the world to speak at the closing ceremony of the International Year of Sport. So 2005, the UN had themed that year, the Year of Sport, to try and promote peace, development, health and education around the world. And I was lucky enough to be one of 4 athletes to have the opportunity to speak about the incredible power sport had brought into my life. Now, as I'm sharing with you, I was one of 4 athletes. You're going to be looking at this photo and trying to work out whether you recognise any other athletes. Does anyone recognise someone they might know in the photo? Federer? Yeah, I can hear a few Federers. And if I ask you to take a bit of a closer look at that photo and have a look at Federer, do you think he's trying to check me out? I know he wasn't, but I'll keep saying that. It's quite a funny shot. You see, life is incredibly unpredictable and so exciting. If I'm extremely honest with you all, I would never, ever imagined myself having the opportunity to carry the torch into the stadium, or being in a photo like this, or even the next photo that I'll bring up, which is a couple of years ago where I got to share the speaking stage with Sir Richard Branson, someone who I'm a bit of a fan of in terms of his leadership, Usain Bolt, David Coulthard. I found myself having dinner with these incredible human beings, and I still look at that photo and think, am I really in it? Like, how did I get in that photo? But life is strange, and life is unpredictable, and life is fantastic. And I am in that photo. So something happened, and something went right for me. And when I reflect on my journey leading up to these moments, I wanted to really unpack what was it within my own leadership journey, or what was it that people saw within me, or what did I do right along my journey that people wanted me to be in those sort of photos or those sort of situations. And a couple of things landed for me. The first one was that I did go through education. I went through public education. For the people that are from my beautiful city of South Australia, I grew up in the northern suburbs and went to school in Salisbury. I then moved to a small country town, well, reasonably large, called Murray Bridge on the Murray River, and went to a public high school. And I do know one of the things that made an incredible difference was my tertiary education. I did go to university. I went to the University of South Australia and studied to be a physiotherapist. And for a lot of my career, I've graduated for 19 years, and I still work a small amount of time as a traditional physio, fixing people's knees or hips or biceps. But one of the things I found along my journey was that I didn't really love fixing biceps or knees. But what I got from my university education from a non-traditional physio perspective was this incredible ability to think, and an incredible ability as a physio to think diagnostically, to be able to look at somebody's situation and see where they're at, maybe see what could be holding them back, what's getting in their way of moving forward, and then giving them solutions on how they could progress and giving them a chance to try them and then come back and see and adjust. So really to unleash and transform their future. And I use that thinking every day in the capacity I now work in. I just don't love fixing biceps, as I said. But combine that with being an athlete and a person that loves sport, I have been coached my whole life. And when you've come through sport and you've been coached, you learn how to look within and you learn to look at where you're at, what could be holding you back, and how to move forward. So combine that with my physio thinking and my high performance ability as an athlete. I learned one incredible tool that I think has made the difference in helping me to transform where I go into my future and impact that next generation is that I really have learned to master leading myself. Self-leadership. And what does that look like? And what is it made up of? And I'm going to talk about that throughout my presentation, but one of the key things that landed for me was that when I mastered leading myself and putting in great boundaries in place to help bring my best, I was able to take my number one value of loving to help people to another level. People that have boundaries in place, have an ability to lead themselves first, can actually contribute to the greater good and be more compassionate. The research shows us. So I'm going to share with you some of those tools, some of the hacks that have really helped me to lead myself for the greater good of others, for transforming the future of others, and to really help that next generation of leaders, because it's within what we role model. It's in whether you think people are watching, people are always watching, and how you take and lead yourself is how you can influence people around you. So my story is that I am a Paralympic athlete, and if you've never seen me before, which is probably most of you, maybe you've been caught up in your own thinking for the last 5 minutes, having a conversation with yourself going, are you sure she got it right? Is she really a Paralympic athlete? Has anyone been having that little conversation with themselves going, I wonder what's wrong with her? Maybe a few of you. And maybe some of you have Googled me, maybe some of you know, but I am a Paralympic athlete, an incredibly proud Paralympic athlete. And the reason why I'm a Paralympic athlete is because I have a very mild case of cerebral palsy on the right side of my body. And when I found out what I had was cerebral palsy, my parents started to receive phone calls from their friends. And their friends were ringing up saying, we're really sorry to hear about Katrina, because at the time they'd read in the paper, there was a national article on me that said star netballer. Now, I think most of you might understand what netball is. If there's a few people in the audience that don't, it's the most popular sport played in Australia and New Zealand and played in the Commonwealth for women. Very similar to, well, it's a team sport with a ball, not similar to basketball, but it gives you a bit of an idea what it is. But this article said star netballer has cerebral palsy. And they were sorry because they didn't really know what that meant. And their first thought was sorrow and sadness and grief for maybe I would lose. Most people have heard of cerebral palsy. In fact, I'm going to ask you all a question. Hands up if you've heard of cerebral palsy. And now I would expect that to be most of the audience. Every day around the world, a baby is born with cerebral palsy. Now, hands up if you could now define what cerebral palsy is. And there's normally maybe one or two, but that's the interesting part, where most society knows what cerebral palsy is, but then when you ask, what is it really, people can't explain further. So what is cerebral palsy? It's actually considered a neurological disorder caused by either an injury or malformation while a child's brain is under development. Okay, while a child's brain is under development. So it's something that's permanent, it's incurable, it's not progressive, and it's okay for the people that I've had a chat to, and you guys, it's not contagious. So you can come and have a chat to me afterwards. It's something that isn't contagious. I joke about that, but you never know some of these myths that are out there. And it's also not hereditary. So let's take a look at my brain. The next picture I'm going to bring up is a picture of my brain. Now, I always wanted to have a picture done of my brain. Is anyone else in the audience one of those people that maybe is a little bit nerdy, love to know what their brain looks like? Yeah, there's a few of us. I only had this done a couple of years ago, and I was really keen to see how my brain looked, for one, and I think it looks pretty good. And if you play Spot the Difference, have a look in my left hemisphere compared to my right, and can you see that tiny little bit of whiteness sort of just below the mid on the left hemisphere? That's the difference, and that's what's called my cerebral palsy. And because it's in the left hemisphere of my brain, I then feel the effects on the right side of my body. So what can't I do? I will go into what I can't do in a second, but I always love to say this to start with. I'm incredibly grateful for all of the things that this body can do. I invest a lot of time and energy into this body that I have, and I always have, to look after it. It's allowed me to do some incredible things around the world, like be an athlete, like walk Kokoda track, like trek to base camp Everest. There's a lot of things that I can do, but it comes with work and looking after it. So what can't I do? The biggest thing I can't do is my right toes, I can't curl them over. So I can really only move them a tiny little bit. Yet I can curl my left toes over really easily, and I've spent 42 years curling my left toes over, and then I go to my right and I can't do it. Now, some of you are probably just checking out your toe curling ability right now in your shoes and saying, yeah. It's a really strange feeling to be able to do it so easily. Like if you're curling your toes over now in your shoes, it's easy, right? And then I go to this side and I have never been able to do it. It's strange. I can't point my toes like a ballerina. And I can't do what's called a calf raise. So because I'm on a stage and you can all see me, I'll show you what my balance is like on my left side, which is pretty good. I can come up on my toes, that's called a calf raise. But if I swap to my right, it's going to take quite a lot of my cognitive load to even talk and balance. I have to use a lot of other things, but to come up on my toes is extremely hard work. I can do it both together. So you might have seen people with cerebral palsy in the community where their arm is more affected. And maybe that's where you see it more obvious. My leg is more affected. So if it was a different way around, you'd notice that my cerebral palsy is there a lot more. One thing I'm going to show you all, and you can do this one with me, is a bit of fun, is pop your hands out in front of you. This is the only thing I'm going to make you do this morning. And turn your palms up to the ceiling, and then down, and then up, and then down. Now, I want you to speed this one up to go as fast as you possibly can. So it looks something like this. Okay, come on everybody. I really deliberately do this because it's the first session in the morning. This is a really good thing if you're feeling dead from the head up at work and you want to wake up your brain. Waking up our brains, getting blood flowing to our brains. But keep an eye on my right side. Can you notice a difference between my right and left hands right at this moment? My right side's probably looking a little bit tired, a little bit floppy. Now I'm going to stop, but I haven't told you can stop. That's actually a classification test that we do in the Paralympic Games, and I always like to see if there's any new recruits somewhere in the room. Now you know what you're really here for. And maybe we can see how many great Barossa reds or whites you had last night. But the interesting thing about my cerebral palsy is I didn't know what I had was cerebral palsy until I was 18. It was picked up at the age of 3 that there was something wrong, but they'd never told my parents it came under the term of cerebral palsy. They told my parents that I'd suffered a very mild injury in utero and that right side of my body was affected. And they did send my parents off to get one of these tiny little plasters made. So here's a shot of me when I was around 3 years of age. And the specialist that we went and saw said to my parents that I'd have to wear one of these plasters on my right leg every night to bed until I stopped growing. Now, does anyone know how long they grew for? Does anyone hope they're still growing? Some people knew how long they grew for. I grew for around 3,500 nights. And you can see I was counting, because if I'm totally honest with you all, I absolutely hated wearing this thing and couldn't wait for that moment where I didn't have to wear it again. Why? Because it's not much fun going to bed with a plaster, for one. It's cold, particularly in winter. You can't walk on plaster like this because it breaks, and I'd have to go to the physio and get a new one made. But the thing I didn't like about wearing it the most was because it was different. And I saw kids at school who had to wear plaster when they broke something. And what my little brain did at that particular time thought, wow, these kids have broken something, they have to wear plaster. I have to wear plaster every night. I must be really broken. And I've always been fascinated with when, as human beings, do we develop enough cognitive capacity to realise we're different? And it's somewhere between 5 and 8 years of age. And I experienced that as a young kid, around the age of 5. I didn't want to be different. I wanted to be the same as everybody else at school because I saw how kids who were different were treated. You know, you had to be tall, you were teased. If you were short, you were teased. If you were fat, you were teased. If you were too thin, you were teased. If you had red hair, if you had blonde hair, let alone have a disability. There wasn't even a kid. I mean, I'm 42. There wasn't a kid with a disability in my school. And what it did for me at this point in time as a 5-year-old is it introduced me to an emotion now I know is called shame. And we all experience shame. Shame around not being good enough. And that's one that I felt very strongly in, that feeling of, it's not a nice feeling inside. I'm sure you'll understand what shame feels like, but for me it's quite an icky, yucky feeling that you just want to run away from. And so what do we do when we experience shame? We try and do exactly that. So what I did as a young kid is I thought, well, how do I not experience this feeling of being different and maybe people not liking me and people thinking I'm not good enough? Maybe what I'll do is cover up, I'll pop some masks on, I'll armour up. And I negotiated with my parents at the age of 5 to not have to wear that plaster when a friend came to stay. And then I even went a step further and said to my mum and dad, can we please not tell anybody there's something wrong with me? You know, it's interesting, around the world, 15% of the population has a disability. And I don't know if you know this stat, but 90% of disabilities are invisible. And if you didn't know that one, have a good think about it, because people are walking around just like me with something that may be different that can really trigger shame around not being good enough. And then we put our masks up and we armour up to make sure we don't have to deal with that. And what happens then is we can't be ourselves. And that is extremely exhausting. So what happened for me as a young kid is I thought, well, if people know that I'm good enough, then they'll like me, then I'll fit in. So I'll work really hard. I'll work really hard at school. I was a fantastic student. I was always a teacher's pet. I was dux in my school. I worked really hard academically. And I was always good at sport. I was born into quite a talented sporting family, and I was introduced to sport as a young age, and it was a part of my foundation, and I excelled at it because I did extra. I didn't just do what everybody else was doing. I had to do that little bit extra to keep up with everybody. And then I realised something special happened, that I started to become better. And I went from being a good young athlete, making it at a higher level in netball. And in 1995, I found myself winning a scholarship to live in Canberra at our Australian Institute of Sport. So this, in 1995, was such a world-class facility where athletes from all over Australia came in, all expenses paid, to do your sport full-time. At least they actually got us to do some work or study on the side, which I really liked, but to be there to excel in your sport. So as you can imagine, as a 17-year-old, this was a really exciting time for me, except it didn't go to plan. The first thing that happened is I developed a significant injury in my right knee that had me sidelined for 10 weeks. Now, I'm sure some of you have experienced injury along your path. It's not much fun. I then got back on the court through hours of therapy. I got back on the court, and the second thing that happened to me, which was the hardest, was I started to not get picked for the team. Now, in netball, we had 12 girls in our squad. Only 10 ever travel, and only 7 are on the court at one time. And they'd put the team list up on a Friday afternoon, and my name wouldn't be on it. And I'd walk away thinking, okay, I just need to work even harder, because my only go-to tool at that point was hard work. And I'd work even harder that week, and I'd go back to the list again, and my name still wasn't on it. And it happened again and again and again. And I don't know what even to say how that feels, except it just sucks. I don't know whether you can remember back to that time where you didn't make something where you got rejected, whether you didn't get into something you were. But for me, it was a feeling of, it just sucked. And what it did, though, do for me is it triggered that emotion again of shame. Because now someone was telling me that I wasn't good enough. And I'd done such a good job of dealing, I was telling myself that I wasn't good enough. Now I had someone tell me I wasn't good enough. And some of the research shows us that the main trigger in leadership around shame is fear of irrelevance. And so for me at this point, it was like feeling that shame around, wow, I'm not even irrelevant, like I'm not even good enough to be in this team. And for me, again, I had to deal with that feeling of what that meant. To top it off, things often happen in threes. I then found out, all in a small space of time, that this thing that I was doing an incredible job of hiding was actually called cerebral palsy. So nothing changed for me at all, except there was a coach at the Australian Institute of Sport named Chris Nunn, and he was coaching the next lot of athletes to go to the Atlanta Paralympic Games. And he saw me walk one day, and he saw my cerebral palsy straight away. His eyes are trained to see it. So we did a few little investigations. I went to the physio and we did a few different classifications and diagnostic tools. And it was, for me, I was labelled having cerebral palsy. So nothing changed, except I really found out what I had was cerebral palsy. And so interesting time for me to have to deal with that. And this coach who actually discovered it, he's one of those amazing leaders with an abundance of energy and passion. He can never sit still. And when we confirmed that what I had was cerebral palsy, this one particular day, I was walking along to netball training. It was like he just jumped out of nowhere in front of me and his hands rubbing together and he was so excited and pumped up. And he said to me, Katrina, it's cerebral palsy. He was so excited and pumped up. It was like I'd won the lottery or something. You know what makes me laugh, but also makes me so sad as well, is he is the only person in my whole 42 years of living that celebrated my cerebral palsy, that has come to me so excited about the fact that I have cerebral palsy. He then went on to say to me, in a year's time, if you get classified, where they do a certain amount of tests on you to make sure you have enough cerebral palsy, because that's in the Paralympics, then I compete against women just like me. So classification is a level playing field tool. And then if I could qualify in a Paralympic sport, and he was a track and field athletic coach, so of course he wanted me to go across to his sport. He said, if you could do that in 1 year's time, you could find yourself at the Atlanta 1996 Paralympic Games. Now, does anyone think I was excited, pumped up, felt like I'd won the lottery? Maybe a couple of people, but if most of you are probably sitting there thinking, no way. Because when you put this together, what happened to me, and I know it will probably happen to you because you're all human like me, what I heard him say was, I could go to a Paralympic Games, which meant that I'd be a Paralympian. Which that meant people would know there's something wrong with me. And I deeply hated that part about myself. I hadn't accepted it, and it triggered a lot of shame, which I didn't want to have. So I wasn't excited and pumped up. In fact, I was really frightened. And Chris Nunn, the coach I was working with, said to me at this particular point of time, and the best advice I've ever been given, he said, why don't you go and sit down with a sports psychologist and have a chat about this situation? Now, we'd been using psychologists very readily as athletes, so for me it was normal to go see a psychologist. And I sat down with a psychologist, and he did something to me that has changed the way that I have worked since. So what he did was he got me to sit at a table, in a chair, and a table was there, and he said to me, now I want you to write out your thinking on the table. He taught me that I could separate myself from my thinking was the first skill. That my thinking is just a part of me, that I didn't have to let it control every decision, particularly if it wasn't helpful thinking. So let's put your thinking on table, and there's this process called metacognition, which is when you think about your thinking. Because sometimes that's the thing that's getting in our way, right? And so he said, let's write down a list of all the things that you're worried about. Maybe the negatives is what we tend to call them. And then let's over on this side of the table, on this piece of paper, write down all the things that could be fantastic out of this situation. The list of negatives. And one thing he did say to me is negative thinking isn't a sign of a weak mind, it's a sign of a human mind. Negative thoughts can serve us really well. It's when they become chronic and when we go to them too often that our thinking might not be accurate and balanced, and we might start to make some wrong decisions. Now, I've often said to people, my disability, I don't feel has disabled me, but my thinking may have. So when I looked at the negative thoughts, it was, what will people think of me? Anyone heard of that one before? Will they like me? What happens if I make a mistake? What happens if I fail? Will I be good enough? And they're my 5 that I consistently hear often in life. Hands up if anyone else has heard one or all 5 of them at the same time. Yeah, cool, you're all human like me. You know what, I hear those thoughts often because for some funny reason in life, our comfort zone is here, and then the things that we would love to do in life is over here, and there's only a tiny bit of crossover where our comfort zone and the things that we love to do meet. Most of the stuff that I choose to do is not in my comfort zone, and every time I step out of my comfort zone, all of those lovely thoughts turn up. Because I don't want to see myself fail. I don't want to see myself make a mistake. I don't want to be judged. But that's just a part of being human. What's your relationship like with yourself in that regard? I then looked at the list of positives. So changing from the negative thoughts to the positives. The positive was something like this. Wow, I could be a Paralympian. That's amazing. I could represent my country. How awesome would that be? Anyone like to represent their country in anything? Is there some high performers out here? I could travel. I'd never travelled overseas before. Atlanta was the next Paralympic Games. If I did okay, I could maybe win a medal. And if I won a gold medal, that meant that I was the best in the world at something. Oh, now some of my values were coming into action. I'm a high performer. I like excellence. I was thinking, wow, okay, this is looking something like I was trying to put together. I didn't realise that this is what I was trying to achieve. It was just packaged very differently than what I thought my life was going to turn out like. But the thing that actually excited me the most was when my value of contribution and helping others was fired. Because I remember asking myself at age 18, why do I hate being different so much? Why am I spending so much time covering this up, hiding it, building my armour up and putting my mask on just to be like everybody else? And I'm sure you've all done it, and I'm sure you relate to this, that it is exhausting. And I was already exhausted. You know, I would make sure that if someone saw that I was limping, because I do limp, my right leg is 1.5 centimetres shorter than my left, and when I get tired, I limp. People would say to me, you hurt yourself, and I'd say, yeah, my knee was sore. Then I'd have to remember I told you my knee, because next week I'd tell you my knee was getting better. Then I might have to come up with something else. It was stubbing toe, or it was where I'd rolled my ankle. And then if people noticed that my right calf was thinner than my left, maybe you have on stage, as a young kid I wouldn't wear shorts or skirts because I was so frightened that people would know that there's a difference. What was I going to say to that? I had so many things built up that I could hide and be a version of myself that I wasn't born to be, and it was exhausting. And I remember at 18 thinking, if I become a Paralympian, I can choose to be the best Paralympian I want to be. If I go to the sport of athletics, and if I run a time, I'm in a team, and no coach can tell me that I'm not good enough anymore. I found a way to still be excellent and a high performer. But I remember thinking, if I become a Paralympian, I want to be an incredibly proud one, and I want to stand on a stage like this today in front of you all and talk about how wonderful it is to be different. I didn't know how, I didn't care, I just knew that that was the right thing to do, because I thought of young kids just like me. I had never seen anyone like me at that point. And I thought one day, if there was a young girl or boy that had cerebral palsy just like me, and one day they could see me and then realise that they could be just like me, that's where my value of contribution and love of helping people was fired, and I was in. I found myself heading to the next Paralympic Games in Atlanta in 1996. I had 1 year to go from being a netballer to the sport of athletics, and I competed in Atlanta in 96 in the 100, 200 and long jump, and came back with 2 gold and a silver medal, which was just extraordinary. I actually got to compete against women like me. You know, it's the first time I won a race in my life, and when I caught up with Usain Bolt, I don't know if anyone's heard his story, he never lost a race. We come through completely different fields of training. He never trained, I trained. And his defining moment, in fact, was not that long ago where he was incredibly good, And his coach said to him, if you want to be the best the world has ever seen, you actually need to start training. Isn't that funny? I come from the school of trained, and I know there's probably some of you out there too that I've come through that school. The Atlanta Paralympic Games was incredible for me. I loved the movement. I was in, and I'm still in. I'll be in Tokyo next year as an ambassador for the International Paralympic Games. It's my 6th Games. Being an ambassador is so much fun. You get to eat what you like, drink what you like, have late nights. You don't even have to perform. The Paralympic movement for me is an incredible movement that the world needed. Have a think about how you grew up and what your parents told you about disability. Oh, don't look at that, you can't stare, you can't ask. In my city of Adelaide, we had a place called the Home of the Incurables, which if you had a severe disability, you were institutionalised. Think about what disability was like for you. And the Paralympic movement for me was that these were incredibly gifted, wonderful athletes who happened to have a difference, that were so comfortable in their own skin that they were happy for the world to be curious and look at how wonderful it is that we're all made differently. And I love everything that the Paralympics does and the legacy that it leaves beyond sport for countries all around the world. So the next Games are in Sydney, and of course, what an opportunity to compete in my home country. We've never had a Paralympic Games again, we've only ever had it once, and it was an extraordinary time for me. Going for gold, I'd won gold in Atlanta, and of course you have your own expectation, and so does everybody else, and things didn't turn out as planned for me. I came home with a couple of medals, and I'm going to show you those medals now. I'm going to keep these medals with me in morning tea, and if you'd like to come and touch them and have photos with them, come and see me at the registration desk. But I won 2 of these in Sydney, 2 silver medals, which was wonderful. Still going for gold, and then I came back with one of these, which I don't know how well you can see, but maybe on the big screen. It's not gold, it's bronze. And in fact, this is one of my favourite medals because it's in Australia, we used to have 1 and 2 cent coins. And in 2000, just the year before, they came out of circulation. So they made our bronze medals out of 1 and 2 cent coins. So it's worth at least 3 cents for those people that like to know how much medals are worth. It actually took me 8 years, 8 years of winning silver or losing gold, however you want to see that. But it took me 8 years to get back to a gold medal level, and this is my gold medal from the 2004 Athens Paralympic Games in the 400 metres. Winning medals for your country is an incredibly amazing thing. This one in particular, because I won gold in my first Games and it took me 8 years to get back to it. 8 years of a lot of time, that's 2 degrees at a university in that period of time, 8 years. And people often ask me, how does it feel to win this? And I really find it hard to explain. And what I do tell people is I've found it very difficult, and I don't know if I've actually found the matching feeling of that in any other aspect of my life. It's not just about me winning it, it's the team of people that come with you. It's your country that you represent. It's every hours that you spent all over that time, not taking shortcuts to bring your best. So what I want to finish with, and to take you into morning tea, is to think about a framework that really helped me to get back to a gold medal level. People ask me over and over again, Katrina, what was the difference from winning, silver to gold? What did you do differently? And for me, what it was is setting up that framework of self-leadership. And I want you to consider 3 things. Think about how you're doing them as an individual, but I also want you to think about in your organisation, is it something that you could start to drive more? So the first one I want to mention is around priority management. And priority management, I really think about in terms of your own very important priorities. We heard from Jamie yesterday afternoon about the importance of values. What are your strengths? What do you want to achieve? What is your legacy? I heard a VC talk about it wonderfully this year in Melbourne, and he mentioned, what would you like people to say about your retirement party? What would you like people to say about you at your 60th birthday? What legacy do you want to leave? What are your priorities with living on this planet, and how do you want to leave it? So that's a really important part of self-leadership. Do you know what it is, and do you action it? But the second part about priority management, and I had incredible learning around this, was that when I actually won silver in Sydney, I sat down with my psychologist afterwards and had a light bulb moment around priority management. I love to help people, and I've told you that. And one of the things that I did or didn't know how to do was I had said yes to helping everyone and everything that came my way, including studying physio full-time, working, training 30 or 40 hours a week, that my performance in Sydney was at a silver level because I had spread myself so thin that I was performing at a silver level in every other aspect of my life. And she said to me, if you're okay with that, keep doing what you're doing. But I wasn't, because my values around high performance and excellence weren't being served. So I had to make some considerable changes. I had to learn what was really important. What were my values? What were my goals? Where was I spending my time? And if anyone's done any work of Stephen Covey, he talks about the great four Ds. I like to add a fifth one in and talk about, is it a chance, do you need to declutter your life a little bit? And if you write down a list of everything that you've said yes to in your life, and then have a look at your goals and have a look at your values and what you want to be known for, and then just check it out and just see how aligned you are. And then maybe you need to continue doing the stuff because that's the important stuff. What could you delete that you said yes to, that you didn't mean to say yes to, but you didn't know how to say no, so you're still doing it? What can you delay? And what can you delegate? And that's what I did for my life. I decluttered to make sure I'm doing the stuff that matters to help to get a gold medal performance for me. I had to learn to say no. And if you like to help people too, and that's something that you find difficulty, please from today find a way to say no. No to the things that you don't want to be doing, because as I said earlier, when you're driving to something and you've got resentment, that's not how we bring our best selves, and that's not how we're compassionate, because we haven't put the right boundaries in place to really help. So have a think about your priority management. The second area I want you to think about today is your energy management. Now, by winning a gold medal, I like to say that I learned how to master my energy. What do I mean by energy management? I mean, if energy is our currency of health, how are you travelling? And do you have a plan in place to help bring your best? Now, well-being is such an important thing now that we're hearing within organisations. And well-being, as we know, translates to high performance in organisations. What do you role model to the people around you? What does your organisation have in place to help people to re-energise physically, mentally, emotionally and spiritually? Do you know your red flags when you're about to be overstressed? And do you have a system in place that when you're about to get overstressed, that you put some of these wonderful things in that re-energise you to help that not from happening? I know your industry is a busy industry. I don't think workload's going to reduce. Yeah? I don't think change is going to go away. What do you do to look after your own self and your own energy within change, within stressful moments, over-stressful moments? And do you know what it is that helps you? And if you don't know what it is, spend some time thinking about what you do, and when you do it, you feel fabulous afterwards, whether it's to calm yourself down or whether it's to lift your energy. And one of the most important things you've got to do, though, is schedule it in with a meeting with yourself. Now, I learned this as an athlete, that my trainings were never negotiable. I went to university full-time. I worked, full-time. I never earned money as an athlete. I did everything else and still got great performances. I scheduled meetings in with myself that were non-negotiable. And I have taken that tool into every aspect now of my life. I schedule meetings in myself when I know it's going to be a really busy period where I know I need to get good energy. I schedule meetings after something that takes a lot of my energy. When I know I'm going through an overstressed period, what do I need to do to bring my best? So have a think about scheduling some meetings in with yourself. And if you're brave enough, if someone rings and said, can I meet you at 10? You'll go, I'm in a meeting. And if it was someone else, you wouldn't think twice about it. Sometimes a funny thing, we think twice about it when it's with ourselves. And for a long time, I wouldn't tell people I was in a meeting with myself. I do now, because I really see the importance of investing in my own self to power and bring my best. Because I know when I haven't, I say stuff, I do stuff that is not in line with the person I want to be known for. And the hardest part for me is not so much professionally, It's at home with the people that I love the most. So maybe for you, thinking about your energy, what could you do? Could you schedule some more meetings in with yourself? Do you create some breathing space, a bit of buffer space? Find what it is for you and schedule it in and help to power your best. And the final area I want to talk about, and again, this is just to talk about how compassionate people ask for what they need. They say no when they need to, and when they say yes, they mean it. They're compassionate because their boundaries kept them out of resentment. So if you're someone that likes to help people just like me, looking after yourself is not a selfish thing. And in fact, it helps us to bring and transform other people's lives for the better by looking after ourselves. Thanks to the beautiful Brené Brown. I'm a big fan of her work. So the final area I'm going to leave you with this morning is a conversation around mind management. And if I was to talk about which area I would spend the most time working on, this would be it. You know, I have told you I have used a psychologist all throughout my journey, and it's the best thing I ever did. As a gold medalist, somebody said, you have a psychologist, not only to go from being good, but to go to great. And I learned these incredible skills that helped me to continue to be going good to great. And it actually prevented me from going down to rock bottom and hitting crisis. I learned these powerful tools to win a gold medal that enabled me to bring my best. And I find the tragedy in that no one else offered me those skills in any other aspect of my life. Yet that's exactly what I needed to learn to power my best on the track and off the track. That's where I learned how to think about my thinking, as I mentioned before. You know, I can be my worst enemy and I can be my best friend. I don't need anyone to sabotage me because I do a very good job of it myself. I've learned how to be compassionate to myself. You know, some of the things I say to myself, I would never, ever, ever say to any other human. So I've invested in how can I be my own friend and walk with my mind as my own friend everywhere I go. And I was gifted those tools because I was a gold medalist, yet they're the tools I needed in life to actually learn to love who I was. The same tool set around not getting caught up in my unhelpful thinking that was driving my shame. To separate from that, I actually realised it is so wonderful to be different. And I can honestly stand here today and tell you how proud I am to be different. You know, the thing that was holding me back was in fact my point of difference. And when I spent that time learning about how powerful that was and how to accept my whole self, and every day I walk out of my house, my mission is to take my whole self everywhere I go. And when I've been able to do that, that's what's transformed my future, but the futures of people that I spend time with. My work now, I do a lot of cool stuff. I spend a lot of time in this beautiful country of Nepal. I'll be there on Friday. I put my passion of helping people, adding the value to people and helping people with leadership, and I'm about to head across to Nepal on Friday. I'll spend 5 weeks now until the end of the year helping people to discover and learn about themselves from here to Nepal, but we add the value to each other in Nepal. I run large events in Australia around New Day and about inspiring the greater good for others. I've learned how to bring the stuff that made me different into a space where I can help inspire and find difference in everyone. And this is my biggest reward, though. This is my favourite work. And this is a photo of a gorgeous young girl from my city of Adelaide who has cerebral palsy just like me. And I'm going to share with this story to finish with you because I was speaking in front of a group, actually in this building about a year ago, and there was a teacher sitting in the audience. And after I finished speaking, the teacher came up to me and she said to me, Katrina, I'm a teacher and I've got a young girl in my class who has cerebral palsy just like you. And she said, and at the moment she's really struggling. she said to me, could you just write down a little note and just write a little message to her, and I'll give it to her on Monday because I think it might help to lift her future and just get her feeling a bit more better about herself. So I said, absolutely, this is what I love to do. So I started and I wrote a 3-page letter to this young girl. And this gorgeous teacher, she framed my letter and printed pictures off of me from the internet and framed this gorgeous thing and gave it to this young, beautiful girl. And I tell you what, when I got to meet this beautiful girl for the first time, I finally found a feeling that matches what it's like to win a gold medal. When you really find and be brave enough to step into your own story and own it and find ways to lead yourself, that you're able to then do the stuff and contribute to people. And for me, people like Summer, to now that she can look up to me and know that she can be like me, it is a feeling that even it goes beyond my gold medal. As human beings, we're all looking for a way to contribute. And I tell you what, it is an incredible feeling. So I want to challenge you all leaving today is, what can you think about on your own journey? Could you think more about your priorities? Do you feel like maybe there's a bit of chance to do a bit of a declutter, work out where you're spending your time, which is in line with you and your team and your organisation? How about your energy management? Do you think maybe you could look at how you're looking after yourself, if that's our currency of health? And even in looking into our mind management, what do you do? And challenge you all, what could you do on a daily basis that could really help you build your psychological skills? Change is always going to happen. Life is always going to happen. And I really love what Jamie said yesterday, when we can show up, even when we can't predict the outcome, is how we show up. When times are tough, that's when I look for someone, how they show up when times are incredibly tough. It's easy to show up when times are going good, but how can we really prepare ourselves, knowing that the future is going to be different every day? And I also really encourage you to think about, as organisations and individuals, how can we really come together? I think the time is now for us all to connect as humans, to think about what we can do for the greater good. How can we walk it, talk it, have our students experience it? What can we do in individuals within our workplace to really power that contribution and compassion for humankind? So thank you so much for listening to me, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.